ينزل الملائكة بالروح من أمره. So he says, there's no doubt that the entity or the essence within the human being that is responsible for actions is the ruh, is the soul, not the badan, not the body. And I mentioned this in the Sunday dars for some people who were there, but I'll just reiterate that one of the important things to remember is the word ruh, the soul, is the same thing as now what psychologists call the mind or the psyche. It's the same thing but with a different name. The mind, the psyche, the ego, all of these terms are now used by psychologists, but in the past was called ruh, qalb, aql, intellect, soul, heart. It's exactly the same thing. There's no difference between the two. They're talking about the same thing. And so you have this big debate amongst psychologists, scientists, philosophers about, is there a difference between the mind and the body, or the mind and the brain? Some very sort of die-hard biologists or scientists, they say there's absolutely no difference between the brain and the mind. And there is no such thing really as mind, it's just brain. It's just neurons firing around. But it's not convincing at all, And many philosophers, because this is where science meets philosophy when you start talking about these type of aspects, of what is mind, and the crux of it is what we call conscious experience or consciousness. That's the crux of the matter. What is consciousness? Because in other words, we as human beings, we experience things. We're not like a computer. If you have a computer could have all sorts of wires and connections and things firing around, electric impulses firing around. A computer can even have an eye, like a camera. You can see an image, but the computer is not experiencing anything, is it, subjectively? It's not a conscious being. That's the crux of the difference, and that's a mystery, and scientists can't really explain that, what is consciousness. So that's why this big debate about, the mind, what is the mind? But this is what we used to call ruh. So computer, no matter how complex, it doesn't, would you say the computer is experiencing something? Does it feel pleasure? Does it feel pain? You could give a computer pain receptors like we have. We have pain receptors, right? We could give a computer the same nerves, wire them up to its like CPU or whatever. So if you smash the computer screen, it will get those neurons will start firing. But will the computer feel pain? Does it experience pain? No, of course not. Why? Because it doesn't have consciousness. It's not a conscious being. And don't get confused between consciousness and conscience, which is a totally different thing. We're talking about consciousness, which is a subjective awareness. You are a person. This is the ultimate gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us as human beings. It is life itself. This is what we call life itself. This is life. You are a perceiving being. You feel things. You have a subjective reality. So this is the ultimate thing that we've been given. And a really interesting thing as well, just related to that, for people who are interested in science or physics. If you look into quantum mechanics, quantum theory, quantum mechanics is the study of extremely small particles, that the universe is made up of. So in quantum physics, they look at not just atoms, but they look at the things that atoms are made up of. So you talk about extremely mind-bogglingly small things. What they call quarks or things like that. And the really amazing thing they found, I really encourage people to read up about this, is, when they look at these very, very tiny particles that the whole universe is made up of, what they found is some really strange findings. And scientists have been completely sort of shocked, don't know what to make of it. Physicists, they don't know how to handle the findings that they found. Which is that these particles, and in fact all particles in the universe, can exist in what they call a wave form. They exist in various possibilities at the same time. Yeah, they exist in various possibilities at the same time. And the only way that the waveform or the particle resorts to one particular possibility out of the multiple possibilities, or the range of possibilities, the only way it falls down to one is when you have a conscious observer. Is when you have a conscious observer of that particle. So this is something really bizarre that physicists have discovered, because they've basically come across the ruh. They've come across the ruh in this quantum theory, and this is established. Quantum physics is not like an opinion of certain, obscure physicists or something like this. This is like established what quantum physics has found. And they're really just scratching their heads to think, how can this be the case? This is famously illustrated by this concept they call Schrodinger's cat. I don't know if people have heard of it or not. Anyone heard of that? The cat in the box. Yeah, you probably heard me mention it before. Read up about Schrodinger's cat. Basically, Schrodinger was one of these quantum physicists, one of the leading people of his time. And he just found this thing so bizarre, that they had found that a particle is in multiple different states at the same time, which seems something you'd think is impossible. And it only falls into a particular state when you actually observe it, when you have a conscious observer. He found this so bizarre and found so implausible that he illustrated it how ridiculous it is by an example, which is called Schrodinger's cat. So he said, imagine this quantum particle was inside a box, a sealed box, and inside that sealed box you have a cat, and inside the sealed box you have a radioactive particle, radioactive. So with radioactive elements, you probably know they decay, and they have half-lives and all of that. But with one particular radioactive particle, you don't know when it's going to decay. So there's a 50-50 chance both ways. And he said the radioactive particle is attached to some poison or something. So if it decays, the poison is released and the cat dies. When the radioactive particle decays, poison is released, the cat dies. According to quantum mechanics or quantum theory, the radioactive particle is in both states at the same time. It is decayed and it is not decayed. It is in both states at the same time. So he said, look, this is just, So in other words, the cat, in consequence, the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. The cat is both alive and dead at the same time, and that's what's called Schrodinger's cat. The illustration. He was trying to show, look, this is bizarre. How can this be true? But this is what quantum mechanics is showing, and it's quite a strongly proven theory. The whole quantum theory is quite a lot of evidence to back it up. A lot of things have proven that it will be true. So the cat is alive and dead at the same time until someone actually opens a box and looks at the cat. At that point, it falls into one of the two states, either dead or alive. So that idea that you have to have the conscious observer to see the cat, you see what I mean? Because consciousness, that is ruh. Consciousness. To have a conscious observer, that is what ruh is. That is the essence of ruh. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah mentioned that, that what is the essence, what is the ruh, what is the soul? In essence, he said, it is this idea of consciousness. In Arabic terms, they call it irada, will, what we call will. Because if you're not a conscious being, you have no will. Like a computer has no will of its own. A computer will only do what you program it. It will never ever do anything of its own will. You could have the most complex supercomputer in the world. You leave it in a room, it will not do anything. It doesn't have a free will. You know what I mean? So that's the ruh. That's the essence of ruh. So that's why these scientists, they have in this amazing way, in the real the cutting edge of physics, they've come across the ruh, and they really, there's a big debate now about this amongst physicists, philosophers, because once again, this is where science meets philosophy. Because when you start talking about consciousness, conscious observers, it's sort of outside the realm of science. So I think I think it's really profound. I think it's a real big proof of our belief, because what really they're saying is you have to have a conscious observer, and the ultimate conscious observer is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is why the universe is in one particular state out of infinite probabilities. You might have heard people talk about this multiverse, or infinite parallel universes. That has arisen from this particular quantum theory problem, because they're saying, why is the universe in one particular state? So they're saying there must be infinite different possibilities, and we are just in one of those infinite different possibilities. If you think about it, all they're doing really is describing one of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that our theologians described 1,000 years ago. That is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because within His knowledge is all the infinite different possibilities. And it's through His will that only this one is actually reality. So that's something I think of real interest in physics. And Muslims should read about that stuff. Okay, inshallah, we're going back to where we were. There's another funny quote by Richard Hawkins, the physicist from Cambridge, the one who's in a wheelchair. Stephen Hawking, sorry, yeah, Stephen Hawkins. He's an agnostic, Yeah, the other guy, Dawkins, is an atheist, but Hawkins is an agnostic. He said he had a funny thing about Schrodinger's cat. He said, whenever Schrodinger's cat is mentioned, I want to pull out my gun, because it's such a bizarre thing for them. Has he? Bad choice, man. Inshallah ta'ala, Allah make him a Muslim. Okay. Anyway, so he's saying the ruh is the thing which controls our actions, because that's our conscious, where we decide we want to do this or we want to do this, not the body. So he says an interesting point here you might have to reflect upon. He says there's no doubt that the ma'rifah of Allah to the soul, the ma'rifah of Allah, the knowledge of Allah to the soul,